Watching it. So, I had the opportunity to listen to Warren this year. That's kind of cool. One of our other business faculty, Greg Moore, who teaches, you guys will have for managerial finance. Have you already had that one or not yet? You did? Well, he apparently owns some Berkshire Hathaway stock, and he couldn't go to the annual meeting this year, so he gave Mary Lou and I and some of his tickets. So we went up there, and it was quite an event. And you know, he's been kind of the guru for investing, and so he's what has been coined a value investor, and it was really by him to look at some underlying fundamentals. He was an economics major, by the way, I might add. So Warren Buffett was an econ major, and probably learned some good decision-making skills and how to value things. And so instead of playing the market looking for opportunities to make a quick buck, he was always in it for the long haul and looking at the underlying assets. Does the stock price match the underlying business that's there? Because that's what's really going to get the long haul. And so boy, he was able to cherry pick a number of wonderful companies that made lots of money. And so his company, Berkshire Hathaway, has been noted to have above average returns compared to the general stock market. And so that's part of what, you know, he found to be a competitive advantage in doing that type of investing. He kind of maybe hurt himself by making that public to everybody, and people wrote books on it, and he was very open about how he made money, and so then other people started doing it, and guess what? Competition came in, and there wasn't as many deals out there to uncover because there was a number of other people using his exact same techniques. So, what can be done over the long haul is different than what can be done in the short haul. So how can we keep a competitive advantage? So from a strategy standpoint, we're looking to maximize profit. Where does that come from? What is this whole stacked pyramid reflecting? Okay, price. All price? I think somebody needs to mute their mic. Is that you, Jesse? I think your mic's on. No problem. Yes, overall wealth, yeah, you're right. So it's got more than just price, because where's the price in this graph?
Price is the surplus profit. Yeah.
This too?
Well, no, the cost is in there too. It'd be the cost and the profit.
Okay, so we got that as the price, right? So the price comes in here, but is that what I think maybe Skylar or somebody else was pointing out? Is that the value to society? No, because the consumer values it higher than what they paid. So that's the consumer surplus. So what this is reflecting is the total value to society of that product being brought to market, whatever it is. So the value does not necessarily equal the price. Oops, looks like you guys get an extra credit point. And it's the dean of the business school. I think you are teaching tonight, but I am wondering if you can come by your office at 10 a.m. to help me with Skype. It's not Skype, it's Zoom. All right, so since it's the dean of the business school and you guys get extra credit, I'm just going to tell him right now, you just gave my students extra credit. So remember, this is a good illustration here, that all I ask is that you disconnect from the outside world so that you don't get disturbed during class. And now his response will not escape me. See, it's like that. All right, so back to action here. So the value to society is $400. Now, what can we do to maximize profit? We want to make this bigger. So what can we do? Okay. We might be able to do some things with price to grab some consumer surplus.
Could you even try to get rid of some costs?
Get rid of some costs. So that's our strategies, right? And that's the only things we can do here is there upward movement on price where maybe we can do some creative things to extract more from the consumer, or reduce costs. We can make this box bigger one way or the other. So that's kind of our profit maximization problem. One thing it does is it recognizes, you know, there is an upper bound here on what we can set our price, right? We can only potentially extract that surplus at most. So it kind of characterizes the problem a little bit differently. All right, so we're going to look at industrial organization and a resource-based view. And we're going to start off with industrial organization. What these two schools of thought look at are external factors and internal factors. And industrial organization came first. That's kind of an older model of economists getting together and thinking, oh, I can figure out all of this stuff and supply and demand and look at all the external factors, and that's what creates a market, right? And the market participants kind of at that aggregate level again. But what we'll find with that is that there's still rates of return that differ that we can't explain by just the pure external factors. And so the resource-based view is probably a little more Warren Buffett-ish in looking at, are there unique things that can really make your firm stand out, not only in the short term, but in the long term? So what is your resource base, and how is it different from your competitors, or how can you make it different, right? So those are things under our control, internal factors. At the end of the day, again, both of these are addressing different issues within the industry and ultimately the individual firm. Okay, by the way, we'll have all these PowerPoints off to you too, so you'll have copies of this. So, very famous model that maybe has a few chinks in the armor, but a lot of people point to this. So definitely important MBA stuff. You probably saw this. Do you remember seeing anything like this in your managerial finance maybe, or other business classes at this point? Does it ring a bell? Porter's 5 forces. Well, it's kind of a handy way to be thinking about, okay, I want to start a business. I really love making cookies. What should I be thinking about? Is that a good idea or not? You know, and so think about these 5 forces before you get into the cookie making business would be the idea. You know, how profitable is it going to be as you start to put together a business plan. These 5 elements are things to be thinking about. So what we're going to go through each one of these individually, but industries that have high profitability tend to be characterized by, there's not a big surprise there, right? We saw that with monopoly, some sort of barriers to entry, so we don't have firms entering. Buyer power, so how about the consumer? How much power do they have over you to negotiate you down, right? So in some industries, the consumers might have some power. If there's a large single buyer of a product, there's like, hey, I'm going to be buying 1 million of these things. You got to cut me a deal, right? So they have a little bit more negotiating power. So where buyer power is lower, you'll tend to see more profits. Supplier power, so on the supply chain, are there people that are in the supply chain that have some control again over the cost that you're going to have, that you're going to incur to bring it to market? So here we're talking about the consumer of your product, them buying it. here we're talking about the supply chain and some people that are providing resources. So hopefully nobody has too much power in that supply chain that can raise cost on you. And then finally, these deal with our product being sold, threat of substitutes. So we might want to be thinking about the existing people that are in the market, but also the threat of new products being developed by existing firms or by new entrants coming in. So the threat of substitutes. And then the rivalry between firms. And then this wild card. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A critic of Porter later said, hey, what about cooperation? So all of these things kind of deal with the threats that are out there, but maybe there's opportunity. One of the forces out there to be reckoned with is the possibility for some complementary things to build the market. We'll talk more about that in a bit. All right, so suppliers and buyers. I'll just let you guys read this and then we'll maybe make some comments on them. All right, so suppliers, if there's going to be power there if it represents a high fraction of your input. So if you have, what would be a good example? If you are a home builder and you have 30% of your cost is in lumber and other building materials, and another 20% is in labor, and there's a threat of unionization or something, this could be a bigger deal compared to another industry that has labor only represents 3% of their building costs, right? So the larger the fraction of the cost, the more important that issue could be for your company. What about this switching? So if buyers are concentrated, it's easier for buyers to switch from firm to firm. What does that say about the elasticity of your product? Is it more elastic or less elastic?
Your product is less elastic, but the industry is more elastic.
Okay, so you went the wrong direction on that, but your heart was right. So, and you bring up kind of an interesting point that maybe I'll spend just a little bit of time on, because it's kind of an important one. If we think about the U.S. auto industry, if the demand for U.S. autos looks like this, what would the demand for a Ford look like? So maybe we're talking about Ford, GM, and Chrysler are the main U.S. autos. Would it be flatter or steeper if we're thinking about the Ford? So which one's inelastic?
Up and down.
So maybe what I could have done is done something like this. Let me draw two demand curves. Which one's the Ford and which one's the U.S. automobile? Demand curve A or demand curve B? Which one has more substitutes? Think about it that way. Does that all of a sudden the light bulb came on? So things that have greater elasticity have more substitutes. The Ford has more substitutes than U.S. autos. So when we start thinking about substitutes for U.S. autos, we've got BMW, Mercedes, Toyota, all the other foreign automakers. The Ford has competition of GM and Chrysler plus all of those. So the more narrowly we define a good, the greater the elasticity is. So an increase in the number of, so probably the takeaway from this that you'll see in other problems, anytime you're increasing the number of substitutes for the good, you are increasing the elasticity. It's more elastic. And so therefore you have less pricing power. That's kind of what this bullet point is speaking to on the buying side. Okay. Other 5. We've talked about barriers to entry. Here's some other examples. So I talked about the patents, but proprietary products, strong brand names, high capital requirements is one. So if you want to start making airplanes or something, you're going to need billions of dollars to start jumping into the auto plane industry, I guess for major jumbo jets, to compete with Boeing and Airbus. Lower costs driven by economies of scale. So again, when there's large competitors involved already, they're taking advantage of economies of scale because they've got a larger market share, so average costs are less. All of those things are potential barriers to entry that you can think about as you open up your cookie business. Substitute products. How easy is it to open up another cookie shop? Or maybe you're manufacturing cookies. I don't know what you're doing, but start thinking about the possibility of entry into that market, if it's easy or not. All right, and rivalry. So this one and the last one kind of confused me a little bit with Porter's analysis. But it's thinking a little bit broader about the things that you might compete on, I think is really what it's hitting at least that's the difference that I pull out of it. So, because it touches in aspects on some of the other forces. But I'll never forget a business partner of mine that I got involved with a restaurant up in Iowa with, and he would always locate a new restaurant where there was a Okoboji grill. So the name of that business was Legends American Grill, which is kind of a sports bar and grill place. And then there was another restaurant called Okoboji Grill. And he would intentionally set up a new location right next to the Okoboji. And he just kind of said, because we can get them, we're going to beat them up. I'm going to do it. So it was kind of this aspect of almost to the point of potentially irrational, but he had other reasons that might be more rational. But on the front of it, it's like just that kind of competitive, like, I'm going to stick it to you. I'm better than you. Here's a perfect example for Ottawa. I'm going to open up an Italian restaurant right next to the only other Italian restaurant in the town of Ottawa. Why? Because I can, because I'm better, because my product's better. You know what? I don't know what their reasoning is. Maybe it was the only space really that was conducive to opening up a restaurant. I don't know. But here we are in Ottawa, little old Ottawa, with 2 Italian restaurants right next to each other. So this idea of rivalry, what are you getting into? Maybe there's some other aspects that you need to consider as you get into that particular business. So with different industries, we do see differential profits or returns. Airlines suck. So that's not a good business. Apparently people get in there and they think they're going to make money or something. Vehicles aren't so hot. Cable service has gone down quite a bit. Some of the better ones here towards the end, semiconductors, pharmaceuticals have been high, although those are coming down now too. So we do see these differences, and why? Because of Porter's 5 forces. That there's differences in those 5 elements across those industries that we could start thinking about. What Porter's forces maybe naively look at, though, is thinking about an industry being a fixed pie, so that we're always competing for market share. And there's a lot of economic models that have it this way. Like, okay, I've got Ford, GM, and Chrysler, 30% of the market, 40% of the market, and 30% of the market, right? And so if I take some from you, it's at your loss. What's called a zero-sum game. My wins are at your losses. But another way to think about it is increasing the entire industry. We all have more pie to share. So we mentioned the Microsoft example before. Maybe by bringing people in that seemingly might be competitors, but if we can grow the industry in a cooperative way, maybe that will be better. I think another example of this is apps. If we think about how Apple and Android surpassed Apple, right, in the number of apps. I was surprised to see how many there are. I'm not much of an app guy, but I got a Windows phone, if that tells you anything, so I don't have quite as many. But I think they're almost like, if there's 500, maybe somebody else can chime in if you know this, but if there's like 500,000 apps for Apple, there's like 700 or 900,000 for Android. And because they didn't go through that process that Apple screens everybody coming through, so they reduced the barriers to entry, and that's what part of what allowed Android to take away market share from Apple. And so that was a strategic maneuver to try to grow the pie, probably grew the pie for everybody. And so not always thinking about competitive threats, but ways that we can use other businesses to cooperate. Okay, resource-based. This is an easy one. Give that a read. Somebody who's really good, what might happen in terms of your competitors? If you've got an employee that's just a rock star, they want them, and they'll offer them, and they'll give them a better pay, whatever, and before you know it, superstar rock star Joe is off to work for the other company. So that resource is mobile, right? So that isn't a perfect fit to say, I've got good people and I've got a good training program, I can make things different, what can I do with that particular person might not be a sustainable competitive advantage. So what can be sustainable? Anytime we can lock down differences that it's just tough to do. Organizational excellence would be one of the reasons we spent some time in an MBA program thinking about how organizations function and how to make them function well. So if we lose Rockstar Joe, it doesn't matter. But if we've got an environment, if we've got a culture that works and helps our clients and our customers and sells product, if we lose any one particular piece of the puzzle, we just fill them in with another one and they come into our culture. It's hard to grow a good culture, right? So that's a possible source of sustainability. Back to the Berkshire Hathaway, it was interesting to learn. I didn't know this until I went to the program, the annual meeting. They have a very decentralized approach. So Berkshire Hathaway has lots of holdings: Dairy Queen, Pampered Chef, shoe companies, window companies, you name it. I mean, it's a diversified portfolio of a bunch of companies. So Berkshire Hathaway is the holding company, and then it owns a whole bunch of businesses underneath it. And so the stock shares of Berkshire is your fractional ownership of a whole bunch of other companies that they've acquired. And what I learned is that in order to grow as big as they did, it's completely decentralized. So they put really solid rock star people in charge of their business unit. Warren and Charlie is his partner that kind of started Berkshire Hathaway, do not micromanage those organizations. They put good people in there and they go on and do their own thing. So it's a really create autonomous business units so that if they make a decision and they screw up, it's their baby. They don't go check with Warren, they don't go check with Charlie, they don't go run up the chain. So it's not a hierarchy like this. It's all decompressed down to the business level. And then I think they tend to pick businesses that have that decentralized approach as much as they can. That differs on the business within that organization as well. And so they've really learned how to compress the hierarchy that we sometimes see within organizations. And so that's a function of Berkshire Hathaway that you don't see at a lot of other places. All right. So this is the last slide, I think. And we kind of summarized this before. All of the resource-based view and even the Porter's 5 forces come down into these areas. How do I cut my costs, reduce intensity of competition, differentiate my product? How do I stand out? How do I make it last so that it can't be copied? I mean, that's what this whole chapter is all about, is how do I come up with some long-term strategies. So, doing similar things, this one failed miserably, this one succeeded. And so Purdue Chicken looked at their supply chain and sold to the consumer that they did, special product for their chickens. The chickens were plump and juicy, and their chickens were higher quality than the average chicken, charging a higher price. So they were able to differentiate themselves that way. The lobster company did the same thing, and they said, well, our lobsters are higher quality, and they did a whole marketing campaign and threw some advertising dollars at it. But in reality, the lobster supply chain is very volatile. You've seen the Alaska's Catch and those TV shows where you've got people going out there, and so quality differences, there's too many variables that you can't control to have really a good product at the end. And so they attempted to do that, but it failed because their supply chain wasn't set up the same way. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. You really have to look carefully at each individual business to figure out what would work in your particular market. All right, questions or comments? At least I think that was the last one, yeah. Okay, let's call it a night.